On our discussions on the pastimes of Sri Radha Govindaji. Anyone here been part of the lecture series the last 2 weeks? Okay, you've been here the last 2 weeks. Everyone else is new, so we'll have to do a bit of a recap. A very quick recap, because we've got a fair bit to cover. Got our last two parts coming up. Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, so we'll do a quick recap on what we've covered in the last 2 weeks, the last 2 Sundays. So the whole conversation has been around the deities of Sri Radha Govindaji, who now reside in Jaipur, who were originally carved by Vajranab, Krishna's own great grandson, under the direction of Uttara, the wife of Abhimanyu, that great hero in the Mahabharata. After the Dwapar Yuga, the deities were lost for a long period of time, and they were found by Srila Rupa Goswami. Srila Rupa Goswami was informed that there was this cow that was giving milk non-stop for weeks together at a particular spot. In the afternoon, when he was chanting the Gopal Gayatri, and he had a smile on his face, and he reached the spot, and when he reached the spot, and they dug 5 stories below the earth. Panchabhuta Bhugarbastha, it was the Sanskrit term we used last time. And after digging 5 stories below the earth, they find these deities of Sri Radha Govindaji. The deities get their name because the Gomata or mother cow found them by giving milk non-stop. Rupa Goswami was in a state of vrinda. Vinda means meditation. Govinda means one who gives pleasure to the senses and to the cows. And because Srila Rupa Goswami was meditating on the Gopal Gayatri. So for all of these 3 reasons, the deities get the name Sri Radha Govinda or Radha Govindaji. And then we did a quick recap on the geopolitical situation in the Indian subcontinent at the time. India was under foreign occupation ruled by the Mughal kings. And there was one king in particular, Akbar, who had a very extraordinary military general called the name of Savai Man Singh. Man Singh met Srila Rupa Goswami en route from Lahore, where he successfully defeated a rebellion, and he was on his way to Bengal because there was another rebellion that had started there. But he crossed Vrindavan, and he met Srila Rupa Goswami. And in front of the deities of Radha Govindadev, he effectively took a vow that if he was triumphant in his excursions in Bengal, he'd come back and build a grand temple for Radha Govindadev. Needless to say, he was victorious. He came back, and then along with Akbar, built this magnificent temple, which was the first of its kind in the Indian subcontinent, made of pure red sandstone, 7 stories tall. He kept his promise, and we spoke about how Srila Rupa Goswami wasn't on the earth to witness the temple being built, but however the Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Kashishwar Pandit and Jiva Goswami, under their direction the temple was built. It was one of its kind, that temple. Then we also spoke about in time to come, fast forward another 80 to 90 years, Akbar made way for Jahangir made way for Shah Jahan, and Shah Jahan was succeeded by one of his 4 sons, whose name was Aurangzeb, who from a very young age had just one prime focus. He lived by the whole motive of Ya Takht Ya Tabut, which meant either the throne or the graveyard. And he got his other 3 brothers murdered and ascended to the throne. And he was a very cruel king. We spoke about this decree, the black decree issued by Aurangzeb in September 1669, where he asked for all the temples in Vrindavan to be razed. And then we spoke about a backstory to that as to why that happened. Because on one day of Ekadashi, today is Ekadashi, today is Kamika Ekadashi, and Ekadashi back then in 1669, Aurangzeb was in a mosque in Mathura. In Mathura, he had converted a temple into a mosque, and in the evening time, and he saw this great galaxy of lights, and he inquired what they were, and he was informed that they were actually a collection of ghee lamps lit in the Radha Govindaji temple. which was built by his own grandfather in Vrindavan. So the light from those lamps was shining all the way to Mathura from Vrindavan, and that highly infuriated Aurangzeb. And this was the keeping in with the tradition of how they celebrate or observe Ekadashi in Jagannath Puri, where Kashishwar Pandit had instituted the practice of lighting the ghee lamps. So fast forward to 1669, Aurangzeb is infuriated that at the thought that his grandfather had built such a grand temple for the Hindus. So the next day he ordered he issued a decree that within the next 24 hours he wanted that whole temple of Radha Govindaji to be razed to the ground. Luckily, then we also heard very briefly that there was one of his soldiers who overheard this conversation, and in the dead of the night took a great risk and rushed to Vrindavan. We don't know the name of the soldier, but we knew that his horse's name was Pavan, and he reached Vrindavan, and he informed the Mahant, one of our original heroes in the story. Anyone knows the name? You were there last time. What was the name of the Mahant in Vrindavan? Yes, very good. You were paying attention. So Shivrama Goswami, the head priest of the Radha Govindaji temple in Vrindavan, was informed that Aurangzeb's troops were on their way at daybreak to raze the temple. And what he did was he rang the big bell and brought all the elders and all the priests of the various temples to the fore and informed them of what was going to happen the next day. Immediately, without sparing a thought, they devised some very novel ways to hide the deities of the various temples and the manuscripts. And luckily, in the course of this lecture series, we've had access to some of those manuscripts from the Vrindavan Research Institute by courtesy of His Holiness Indradumna Swami Maharaj from ISKCON, who's working with the Vrindavan Research Institute in digitizing them. So the next daybreak, the Aurangzeb soldiers reached Vrindavan. They came here. There wasn't enough. What they did was they ended up looting all the temples on their way. We spoke about what happened to some of the prominent temples at the time, but the focus of the class was on the predominating deities of Sri Sri Radha Govindaji. We spoke about how the next week was filled with, horror and terror as they slaughtered numerous inhabitants in Vrindavan to still try to unearth where the deities were. The deities were hidden under a lake of Govinda Kund by Shivrama Goswami and his followers. And then we also briefly recapped that the 10 days after this event, where they had looted the temple, all the jewels and the gold coins in the temples were looted by Aurangzeb and his soldiers, as well as committing various other atrocities. They still couldn't find the deities of Sri Sri Radha Govindaji. We then also spoke about how Shivrama Goswami and his band of his followers very creatively used these torches laced with opium powder in the dead of the night, and went through and covering their own faces, kind of intoxicated the guards, Aurangzeb's guards, who were paying midnight vigil. And while they were in a state of intoxication and almost slumber, they smuggled the deities out of Vrindavan on a bullock cart filled with hay and took them to Radhakund. We also briefly recapped, we had this question about, well, if Aurangzeb had issued a decree to raise the whole temple of Sri Sri Radha Govinda Devji, how come we still find the temple today in Vrindavan in a much reduced form? It's still there. It's a 3-story temple, not a 7-story temple anymore. And that's because over a period of 2 months, we heard about how 4 floors of the temple were destroyed. And then there was a particular incident again where Aurangzeb was resting in a mosque in Mathura on the balcony, and from nowhere a swarm of bees came and started biting him left, right and center, thousands of them, and he was escorted inside the palace. And he asked his head priest who was treating him as to why this has happened to him, because in his head he was a very pious Muslim. And the priest mustered all the courage he could to tell him that it's because of what you did to Radha Govindaji, the deities of the Hindus, that this has happened to you. And Aurangzeb after that immediately stopped further destruction of the Radha Govindaji temple. But he was still very keen on trying to trace where the temple was. So this was a brief recap. Then we also spoke, last week we heard about how the deities slowly made their way from, over the course of 58 years, it takes 3.5 hours today, if you get on the Vrindavan Express Highway from Vrindavan to get to Jaipur by road, took the deities 58 years to get to Jaipur. And we spoke about how the deities traversed from Vrindavan to Radhakund, spent some time in Radhakund, then how the worship of the deities was maintained there, and how they were protected by the Jat and the Gujar community, who were this warrior class tribe of people, who were also, many of them were initiated by Shivrama Goswami. And then the deities slowly made their way into Kamyavan, how Vrindadevi decided to stay back in Kamyavan, and after 5 years, the rest, she stubbornly stayed back in Kamyavan, the deity of Vrindadevi, and the other deities, namely Gaura Govinda and Sri Sri Radha Govindaji, then made their way into Bhatara and various other places around UP and Rajasthan before finally reaching Jaipur and being established there by King Jai Singh II, after whom the city of Jaipur was formed in the year 1727. So I've done probably a 12-minute recap of 2 hours of our lecture series. So this is where we reached last week, where the deities finally reached Jaipur, and they're in this place called Surya Mahal. Even till this day, in Jaipur, they're in this place called Surya Mahal, and you can have their darshan. But next time you have their darshan, there's this whole backstory of how they originally got there from all the way from Vrindavan. Now, in time to come, since post 1727, all the predominating deities of Vrindavan, which was Radha Govinda, Radha Vinod, Radha Madan Mohan, and Radha Gopinath, were all in Jaipur, somehow protected from the Mughals and Aurangzeb. We also briefly spoke about that. Finally, in the year 1707, Aurangzeb died in a very miserable and bitter fashion, and there was this grand celebration to celebrate his demise. And post 1727, the deities were very well situated, and there were hundreds and thousands of visitors to Jaipur every year to see the deities. In fact, there was a time where the devotees from Vrindavan demanded for the deities to come back to Vrindavan. But Maharaj Jai Singh said, no, we built a palace for the deities, they are our property, and they will remain in Jaipur. And it's because of this reason that the deities are still in Jaipur till this date. We also spoke about a particular verse from the Padyaval, which is an unpublished manuscript written by Narottam Das Thakur, where he says, Shri Govinda Gopinath Madan Mohan, where he refers to these three main deities, Shri Sri Radha Madan Mohan, Shri Sri Radha Govindaji, and Shri Sri Radha Gopinath. And he says that because they are in Jaipur, Jaipur is to be treated as the Gupta Vrindavan or the hidden Vrindavan. And Jaipur is known as the hidden Vrindavan even today. Now, what happens we also spoke a bit about the achievements of King Jai Singh II and what a noble king he was and his extraordinary achievements. So now, we come to that part of the story where it's post 1727 and Sri Sri Radha Govindadev ji finally have a safe home in the city of Jaipur. What was happening in the city of Jaipur at that point in time is that the devotees who over the years, Shivram Goswami's descendants, we spoke about Govinda Charan Goswami, who after Shivram Goswami leaves his body, his younger son is the chief priest in Jaipur, are looking after the deities, and they're all from the Sampradaya where the devotees in ISKCON come from. Can anyone tell me what Sampradaya do the ISKCON devotees come from? What happened to all these initiated devotees who are sitting in the front? What Sampradaya are you guys from? Okay, Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya. That's very good. So the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya, there are 4 prominent Vaishnava Sampradayas. Which of the Gaudiya Sampradaya is an Upa Sampradaya or a sub-branch of which Sampradaya? You just said it. Okay, so where does it originate from? Brahma or Lord Brahma. Who's the predominating Acharya of this Sampradaya? What comes after Brahma? No, you said Brahma, Madhava. Yeah, so Madhavacharya is the predominating Acharya of this Sampradaya. There are how many bona fide Vaishnava Sampradayas are there in total? 4. So this is the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya, established by Lord Brahma himself. Madhavacharya is the predominating acharya. Then there is the Shri Sampradaya. Anyone know who the Shri Sampradaya is? Yes, it's established by, as the name it comes, Shri. Shri is Lakshmi Devi, comes originally from Lakshmi Devi, established by Ramanujacharya and his followers. A lot of the devotees in South India, especially the devotees in Tirupati and those temples, the Vaishnava temples, Sri Rangam, Tirupati, Kanchipuram, they all hail from the Shri Sampradaya. Then you have the Rudra Sampradaya. Who establishes the Rudra Sampradaya? Lord Shiva. And the predominating acharya of the Rudra Sampradaya is Vishnu Swami. And then you have the Nimbarka Sampradaya, established by the 4 Kumaras, the sons of Brahma. Yes, and their predominating acharya is Nimbarka Acharya. So back then, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas had played and were very instrumental in bringing the deities somehow over a period of 58 years to Jaipur from Vrindavan, through Radha Kund and Bathara and various other places. The 10th home and final home was Jaipur. But there was also a sect of the Shri Sampradaya, a small sect of the Shri Sampradaya known as the Ramanandis. They originally were followers of Sri Ramananda, who was a disciple of Sri Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya had asked them to go up to North India and preach the cult of Vaishnavism, or Vishishta Dvaita, Advaita, or the cult of duality, Dvaita, Advaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Advaita, where the predominating belief, as it is in all the Vaishnava Sampradayas, is that there is the super soul within you, the Paramatma, and you are the Atma or the soul, and then there is the Paramatma, the super soul, who is Krishna himself. And the Shri Sampradaya predominantly are worshippers of Sri Lakshmi Narayan. And Ramanujacharya sent Ramananda to establish the cult of the Shri Sampradaya elsewhere in North India. They established themselves originally in Ayodhya, and in Ayodhya is the center of which famous Vaishnava deities and the birthplace of which form of Krishna? They became very staunch Sitaram worshippers, and from Ayodhya they slowly went upwards and travelled up to Jaipur and had a very considerable following in Jaipur. Now, with the Shri Sampradaya, as they saw the growing influence of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they actually raised a few objections to Jai Singh. They raised a couple of objections. Firstly, they challenged the authority of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and their whole pretext for doing so was that they said that this Sampradaya does not have a Vedanta Sutra. They don't have a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, the essence of all the Vedas. So for a bona fide Sampradaya, you need to have a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, the Bhagavad-Gita, the Upanishads and the Vedanta Sutra. And they argued that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas don't have one. They also argued another point which was very controversial in that period, where they said that the deities that you have in your palace are Radha Govindaji. Okay, Govindaji is Krishna, we know him. But Radharani, there is no mention of Radharani in any of the scriptures. None whatsoever. So what is she doing in your palace? What is she doing in Surya Mahal? And it got so controversial that the king had to request the Gaudiya Vaishnavas to come up with an answer. Until they came up with an answer, the deity of Radharani in the pastime of Radha Govindaji was taken away, was taken out of the palace, was taken out of the temple in Surya Mahal and kept in Jai Singh's palace. So you had, imagine going to a Radha Krishna temple where there is no Radharani. I mean, it's totally unheard of today, isn't it? And if what had happened then, if the Gaudiyas were not able to meet the challenge of the Ramanandis, pretty much we wouldn't have had Radha Krishna temples here. So this is a very, very interesting point that we're going to talk about. So these were the 2 points that the Ramanandis raised, that the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya is not a bona fide Sampradaya because they don't have a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, and there is no mention of Radharani anywhere in the scriptures. To an extent, they were, okay, whether Ramananda is right or wrong. What does everyone think? Okay, both. That's one answer. Well, you've got Radha Krishna in the temples today, so were they right or wrong? Wrong. Okay, that's another observation. All right, we'll get into it then. Now, if in a way they were right, because actually in none of the scriptures, one of the names of Srimati Radharani is Veda Gopya. Gopya means hidden in the Vedas. She is indirectly referred to in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu established 500 years ago, where he then came as the avatar of Radha and Krishna combined. And we have Gauranita here. Gora or Gauranga is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he established the worship of Radharani very predominantly all over the world. And today, the followers of Srila Prabhupada, this movement, and all the other Vaishnava Sampradayas recognize Srimati Radharani. So back in the day, there was the Ramanandis argued that Srimati Radharani is not mentioned anywhere in the scriptures. And you don't have a bona fide commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So Jai Singh was in a bit of a dichotomy because he had a very soft spot for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So he wrote a letter to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the predominant, the predominant Vaishnav scholar of that time, the predominant Vaishnav Acharya of the time, who was seated in Vrindavan. And he wrote a letter to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, explaining that, look, he's at odds to do what he's done. He's had to take the deity of Radharani from the temple and keep her in his own palace, and he won't have much say in the matter if the Gaudiya Vaishnavas cannot conjure up their own commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. So he was in a catch-22 situation, if you understand the phrase. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and this is and luckily thanks to His Holiness Indradumna Swami Maharaj as well as the Vrindavan Research Institute, we had snippets of the original letters exchanged between Jai Singh as well as Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur nonchalantly replied to Jai Singh saying, don't worry. This whole arrangement where Radharani is come to your palace is nothing, and he used the word, a particular Sanskrit word, is nothing but a display of her man. Man means she's had a transcendental tiff. Krishna must have said something to her, and they've had a bit of a disagreement. It's a transcendental tiff, and she's just sulking in your palace for the interim. She'll soon go back to Krishna. Radha and Krishna are never always together, so don't worry. This is just a display of her man. As far as coming and challenging the Ramanandis is concerned, he was willing to do it, but he was at a very advanced state of his life. He was quite old, and the travel from Vrindavan to Jaipur would have been too much for him physically. However, what he did was, he then nominated another Vaishnav scholar of the time, Pandit Baladev, to go and challenge the Ramanandis. Now, Pandit Baladev was in Vrindavan learning the Srimad Bhagavatam under the direction of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He was born in that same period in a place called Remuna in Orissa. Anyone here from Orissa or been to Orissa? No? Oh yeah. Have you been to Remuna? Or you've been to Jagannath Puri? Jaipur. Okay. So Remuna is a small town near another town called Balasore in Orissa. It's roughly 2.5 hour train journey from Puri, which is the real place of pilgrimage, the biggest place of pilgrimage in Orissa. There's another famous pastime of Madhavendra Puri and Kirchor Gopinath in Remuna, which is a tale for another day. It's actually got the deities of Krishna, which was carved by Sita Devi in the Treta Yuga and worshipped by her. So anyway, he hailed from Remuna. Baladev hailed from Remuna, and over a period of time, he finished school. He was a very bright student, and in the course of his travels, he came in touch with another great Vaishnav scholar of the time, Pandit Radha Damodar Pandit, whom he took initiation from. Radha Damodar Pandit was a disciple of Rasikananda Prabhu, who was a confidential associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from 500 years ago. And then he got trained in all the Vaishnava texts under Radha Damodar Pandit. And then Radha Damodar Pandit gave him a special instruction to go to Vrindavan and under the tutelage of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, immerse himself in the study of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which he did. And now fast forward to this situation in the early to mid 1700s, where you have this situation where Jai Singh is put in this pickle by the Ramanandis, and he's appealed to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for help, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur sent his student Baladev to go and contest this debate with the Ramanandis. So Baladev arrived in Jaipur in due course of time, and he had a very small amount. So the Ramanandis put this really strong argument. They said, we give you 3 months. In 3 months you need to produce a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. And if you can produce that in 3 months, then we can have a debate. And they had a place called near Jaipur called Galita, or Galtha as it's called today. They said that will be the place of our debate when you have your commentary ready. So what do you think Baladev did? Yeah, what would he do? 3 months was a very short time to write a commentary, a synopsis of the Bhagavad-Gita, the Upanishads, and the full Vedas end to end. What do you think most devotees do when they are put in a kind of a trapped situation? They pray. So he appealed to Govindaji for help, and he supplicated himself before Govindaji and said, how am I going to manage this? And then in his dream that night, Govindaji appeared himself and said, don't worry. Not only will you be able to write the commentary by my direction, but your commentary will be faultless. He says, you will write a faultless commentary under my direction. And then over a period of 3 months, miraculously, Baladev produced a commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, on all the Vedas, the Bhagavad-Gita and the Upanishads. And he had a debate in Galita or Galtha, that place near Jaipur. And his arguments were so profound and so clear. And he knocked back all the arguments that the Ramanandis had on the position of Radharani, where Radharani is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures, as well as his commentary on the Vedanta Sutras, that some of the followers of the Ramanandis actually came and took initiation from him, from Baladev, and became initiated into this line of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And he was given, in those days, if you won a debate like that, you had this title called Digvijay. So he got the title of Digvijay. But more importantly, he established the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya, which all of you are sitting in. He established the bona fide nature of this Sampradaya. So in a nutshell, we are part of the Madhava Sampradaya, but slightly different. The Madhava Sampradaya is the trunk of the tree. We are one of the branches of the tree, but the branches can produce fruits which the trunk can't. And there are some subtle points of difference. But overall, Jai Singh was overjoyed. The inhabitants of Jaipur were overjoyed that Radharani could come back. Radharani came back to the temple in Surya Mahal with Govinda Devji, much like Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur had predicted, that this was just an exhibition of a man or transcendental tiff with Krishna. They resolved their differences, and she was back next to Govinda Devji, back in the temple. And there were festivities all over Vrindavan, all over Jaipur, and King Jai Singh gave Baladev the title Vidya Bhushan, which is why he is now today known as Baladev Vidya Bhushan. Now for all these devotees sitting in front, or anyone in the class, where do you see the name Baladev Vidya Bhushan appear in Prabhupada's books? Okay, where in the Bhagavad-Gita? Okay, so we've got a copy of the Bhagavad-Gita as it is, and I deliberately had it. So when we open... So the point to note is that Baladev Vidya Bhushan dedicated his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra We'll talk about that as well. So here we go. Srila Prabhupada has written, this is the largest, most circulated edition of the Bhagavad-Gita in the world ever. Billions of copies thanks to devotees such as these. And here, right before the introduction, Prabhupada writes, he dedicates the Bhagavad-Gita, his commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita to Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, who presented so nicely the Govinda Bhashya commentary on Vedanta philosophy. So the commentary that Baladev Vidyabhushan presented was called Govinda Bhashya. Anyone knows why it was called Govinda Bhashya? Bhashya means spoken, Govinda means Govinda Dev. So because Govinda Dev appeared in the dream of Baladev Vidyabhushan and actually spoke and instructed him on the commentary that he wrote, he named that commentary Govinda Bhashya. And just like Baladev Vidyabhushan dedicated his commentary to Govinda Dev Ji and hence it's called Govinda Bhashya, Srila Prabhupada dedicated the Bhagavad-Gita, his commentary on the Bhagavad-Gita to Baladev Vidyabhushan, because of which we still have this sampradaya today. So Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan ki. There you go. Thank you. And then, so he was conferred this title of Vidyabhushan by King Jai Singh II. And after that, Baladev Vidyabhushan, the simple, humble devotee that he was, he'd done his work, he went back to Vrindavan, and he was given a hero's welcome in Vrindavan. And he was welcomed in Vrindavan, and he was specifically given a special service to look after the deities of Sri Sri Radha Shamsundar. And in the course of writing the Govinda Bhashya, again, thanks to His Holiness Indradumna Swami Maharaj as well as the Vrindavan Research Institute, we have some of the dialogues captured between the Vaishnavas at the time as well as Baladev Vidyabhushan. And when he had his own deity in Vrindavan, and after this whole pastime where he went to Jaipur, defeated the Ramanandis and established Radharani back with Sri Sri Radha Govinda Dev Ji, he named his deity Vijay Govinda. Vijay means victory, or Vijay Govinda. And there's a particular verse from the Govinda Bhashya which he dedicates to his deity, Vijay Govinda. And it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the commentary, so I'll read it out to you. So he says, Baladev Vidyabhushan says, bestowing upon me an ornament in the form of knowledge, he who is most lofty led me to fame. May that Sri Govinda, whose commentary appeared to me in a dream, that companion of Sri Radha, he whose limbs are pleasantly bent, be ever victorious. And hence he named his deity Sri Vijay Govinda. So he acknowledges that, the commentary that he wrote, he was just an instrument in the commentary. The dictation was done by Govinda Dev Ji, and hence the name Govinda Bhashya. Very humble of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan. So we had this whole tumultuous time of Radha Govinda Dev moving everywhere. Now even when they're situated, Radharani has to be taken out and they come back. But then the constant in all of this, in the city of Jaipur, is Jai Singh, who's overseeing everything. Jai Singh in the year 1743, so 6 years after this pastime and after establishing the deities of Sri Sri Radha Govinda Dev Ji, on 21st September 1743, Savai Jai Singh departed this world at the age of 54. So for anyone who came to the class, what age did Jai Singh become the king? 11. And he departed this world at the age of 54. And when he departed this, and there are accounts of how Jai Singh departed this world, and the accounts are right till the end of his life, the period when he was actually, his soul was leaving his body. All that the people, the recounts of the palaces of Jaipur have, is that he was crying out Radhe Govinda, and in that consciousness and that state of mind, Maharaj Jai Singh left his body. Some other information of Maharaj Jai Singh is that the other reason why he gave Baladev Vidyabhushan that title of Vidyabhushan is that because he himself was a scholar, he could recognize the scholarly attributes of Baladev Vidyabhushan. Jai Singh, although being a king, was an author of many books. We've got, luckily thanks to the Vrindavan Research Institute, we've got the names of some of his books. One of his books was called Vedica Vaisnava Sadabhuta Grantha. Then he also wrote the Prabhu Vedika Puja Padati, and then he also wrote the Satchidananda Atmapada Brahmacharana. So these are some of the books that really deep Vaishnava philosophy that this king, great king Jai Singh II wrote. And then in the coins that were published in Rajasthan at that point in time, the coins have an insignia. If you look at most coins here in Australia, you look on one of the sides, they've got an emblem of Queen Elizabeth. That's the insignia. So King Jai Singh, he had the insignia of Radha Govindaji on his coins, and there was a verse on the just above the insignia on all the coins, where he wrote, Shri Govinda Charana Savai Jai Singh Sharana, which means the lotus feet of Govinda are Sahai Jai Singh's refuge. Such a great king. So anyways, in this state of mind, another great hero, and we've had quite a few. We've had Shivram Goswami, we had Akbar, we had that soldier whose name we don't know, who informed the Vaishnavas, all those Vaishnavas in Vrindavan back in the period of those 58 years, the Jats, the Gujars, and here Jai Singh II leaves the world at the age of 54. Okay, so that was this pastime of Radha Govindadev. Now, as we are talking about the pastimes of the Lord, so in the Srimad Bhagavatam in particular, in the Bhagavad-Gita, it's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is considered by all the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, all the followers of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, to be the summum bonum, or the essence of all Vedic literature, because of which reason they did not have a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, because they considered the Srimad Bhagavatam to be the essence of all Vedic literature. Now the Srimad Bhagavatam, question for anyone, the Srimad Bhagavatam is full of the pastimes of the Lord and his fill in the blanks, and his associates and his devotees. Anyone give an example of any of the devotees of the Lord who are glorified in the Srimad Bhagavatam? Yep, Prahlad Maharaj, correct. Dhruva Maharaj, correct. Yep, Parikshit Maharaj. So anyways, the narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam is incomplete without glorifying the Lord's devotees. So we'll glorify a couple of them here today as well. Two very, very special devotees. Before we do that, we'll invoke a poem written by another great Vaishnava scholar of the time, whose name was Srila Devkinandan Prabhu. Sets the scene for the next couple of pastimes we're going to talk about. And Srila Devkinandan Prabhu says, it's a Bengali poem. It says, Shakala Vaishnav Pade Mora Namaskar, Iti Kichu Aprad Na Huka Amar, Hoi Chen Hoite Prabhu, Chatur Bhakta Vrinda, Bandana Kori Shabara Charanar Vrinda. So the translation is, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of all Vaishnavas, praying that I will not commit offenses in my attempts to please them. To all the Vaishnavas who have ever been, to all the Vaishnavas who will ever be, I offer obeisances unto their lotus feet. So we've got just over 20 minutes. We will talk about two special devotees, and we'll speak about two special lady devotees or Mataji devotees of Sri Sri Radha Govindadev Ji. And they were both queens of Akbar. One of them is quite vividly known in modern history. The other one not so much, except to people who are local to Vrindavan. So one of them is one of Akbar's principal queens. Her name is Jodhabai. Anyone heard of Jodhabai here? People of any Bollywood aficionados? Come on. There was a movie made in her name as well, Jodha Akbar, right? So that's the same Jodhabai we'll talk about. So Jodhabai, born in the year 1542, she was the daughter of King Piramal, and at that time, between the Mughals and the Rajputs, they used to have alliances for mutual benefit, where the Mughals and Rajputs kind of helped each other. There were military alliances, and then there were matrimonial alliances as well to strengthen the military alliance and the economic alliance. And Akbar was married to Jodhabai. Jodhabai was married to Akbar at the age of 19, and she was known all over the world, renowned all over the world for her exquisite beauty. Like very well known all over the world for her beauty. After marrying Akbar, Akbar gave her the name Maryam uz Zamani, but he never converted her to Islam. And Jodhabai, from a very young age, was a very staunch devotee of Krishna, was a very staunch devotee of Sri Radha Govindaji. In fact, we spoke about how Akbar commissioned the original temple of Sri Radha Govindaji in Vrindavan, the 7-story red sandstone temple, at the behest of which military general? Who's been paying attention? Yes, at the behest of Man Singh. Jodhabai also, when she heard about Man Singh's request, pestered Akbar into building this temple. And Jodhabai, there were many poems written about her beauty, comparing her beauty to being more than all the apsaras in the Swarga Loka. And there's a very interesting pastime about Jodhabai. So when a year into her marriage, she decided to visit Vrindavan. And you had the royal queen mother coming to Vrindavan. So the roads were all. So when you have any royalty these days, what do you have in the form of royalty? If you had Queen Elizabeth, I think a few years back you had. They're not royals anymore, but you had Meghan Markle and Prince Harry visit Sydney. And there was this whole euphoria around the Sydney Harbour. Around the Opera House and all the other places they visited. Here, in those days, you had the actual queen, not a ceremonial queen or princess or prince, and the actual queen visit Vrindavan. So there were separate tents laid out to commemorate Jodhabai's visit, and she was the roads were sprinkled with sandalwood paste to commemorate that the queen was coming to Vrindavan. And at that point in time, you had this one devotee whose name was Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, who was a disciple of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. We spoke about Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's prominent role in the temple of Sri Radha Govindaji when it was originally built. Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami was one of his chief disciples. And when news came to Vrindavan that Jodhabai, Akbar's wife's coming to Vrindavan, the town was abuzz that you've got the most beautiful person in the world coming to Vrindavan. And all the inhabitants of Vrindavan were talking about Jodhabai's upcoming visit. So when she visited Vrindavan, there's a particular saying in amongst the Vaishnavas that the activities of a sadhu are achintya or inconceivable. So this particular devotee, Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami, he had this curiosity. He wanted to see Jodhabai, and which was no mean feat, because no man could get anywhere near her, unless you wanted to be executed, of course. So what Gadadhar Bhatta Goswami did was that he took his wife's garments and dressed himself as a lady, and he somehow masqueraded himself as being one of the attendants of Jodhabai, and somehow found a way to get into Jodhabai's tent, just to get a glimpse of her. And he actually saw her and he was impressed, but then he immediately ran away from the tent, and like a madman he was running through the forests of Vrindavan, saying, it's a lie, it's not true, it's a lie, it's a lie. And the people are thinking, here's this person in a man's voice, wearing a sari, dressed like a woman, with long hair and running around saying, no, it's a lie, it's a lie. He's run from Jodhabai's chambers as well, some daring. And they stopped him and they said, what are you? And his wife also came there and she was like, what are you doing in my clothes? What's a lie? So like all this, while you have been led to believe that Jodhabai is the most beautiful woman in the world, that's a lie. There is no comparison of her beauty to Srimati Radharani's. It's a lie that she's anywhere near to Srimati Radharani in beauty. So that's a pastime from Jodhabai's time. And to kind of supplement this pastime, there's another very famous Vaishnav prayer which Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur prays, particularly about it's actually extolled by Rupa Goswami, and it says, and the prayer is, glory to the delicate personality who bears the name Radha, who all the Vedas cannot fittingly describe, who is the sweetest essence of the ocean of nectar, whose mercy is limitless, who is exceedingly graceful and beautiful, and love for Krishna has captured her heart. Srimati Vrindavaneshwari, Srimati Radharani ki. So now we'll talk about one more great devotee from that period. She's also a wife of Akbar, a bit lesser known as compared to Jodhabai. Her name's Taj Bibi. Anyone heard of Taj Bibi? Oh, only one. But many more had heard of Jodhabai. So, okay. So Taj Bibi is a slightly lesser known wife of Akbar, but definitely a very glorious Vaishnava in her own right. So Taj Bibi, unlike Jodhabai, who's born in a Vaishnava family, Taj Bibi is a Muslim by birth. In fact, she's the daughter of Akbar's spiritual master at the time. And over a period of time, Akbar's spiritual master dies and he leaves behind his only child, who's this little girl, Taj Bibi, and Akbar marries her. So she is also one of Akbar's queens. And she's just taking a tour of the whole kingdom of the province one day in her palanquins. And her palanquin bearers somehow come around to the area of Vraja, Vrindavan, where the original temple of Sri Sri Radha Govindaji ji was. And at that time, around noon time or midday, the big bell of Radha Govindaji ji is struck in the temple, which reverberates around the whole town. So she asks the palanquin bearers, where is that sound of that bell coming from? And the palanquin bearers tell her, oh, that's the temple of the Hindus. His name's Govindadev. Oh, and her immediate reaction is, oh, that's Chota Allah. All right, I want to go and see Chota Allah, the temple of the Hindus, the Lord of the Hindus. And the palanquin bearer tells her that, no, your husband would not be very pleased if you did this, In fact, he's expecting you this evening. I suggest you don't go to that temple. She says, no, I insist. I want to go and see Chota Allah, or the temple, or the Lord of the Hindus. So the palanquin bearers take her to the temple. And as soon as she sees, and this is just quite extraordinary. We've heard of Mirabai, we've heard of many other great devotees. These devotees are incomparable. So Taj Bibi, the first time that she sees the form of Radha Govindaji ji, the three-bended form of Radha Govindaji ji, she just becomes motionless for an extended period of time. And tears just start flowing down from her eyes. And she's just awestruck. And the palanquin bearer comes and tells us, okay, you had the darshan of Radha Govindaji ji, now let's go back to Agra. And she's like, no, I have decided that I am going to stay here with Radha Govindaji ji for the rest of my life. And Taj Bibi, this is like the royal queen of Akbar, and when you say royalty, it's real royalty. One can't even imagine the kind of opulence that such queens enjoyed. Saying, from today onwards, I'm going to stay in front of Radha Govindaji ji. And until the end of her life, she stayed near Radha Govindaji ji. In fact, in time to come, she took initiation from Vallabhacharya, who was a contemporary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Anyone here from the Pushti Marg devotees who chant the mantra Shri Krishnam Sharanam Mama? You would have heard that mantra. So she gets initiated in that line. And then during her lifetime, Taj Bibi, who is now living in Vrindavan, she wrote 400 poems, which were written in a mix of Urdu and the Braj Bhasha. And there are many, many poems that she's written. And then over a period of time, one fine day, the predominating deity for the followers of Vallabhacharya was the temple of Srinagi in Gokul. Anyone here from Rajasthan again? Okay, so where is the temple of Srinagi today? Okay, where is Nathdwara in? Yep, near Udaipur. So there's another famous story of a famous pastime of how over the years, with Aurangzeb's rule, the deity of Srinathji made their way from Gokul to Nathdwara near Udaipur. But when it was in Gokul, back in that time, in the time of Akbar, in the 1500s, Taj Bibi used to go every day to first take darshan of Govindadev ji, some of the other predominating deities in Vrindavan, and finish up in Gokul in front of Srinathji. And one fine day, she actually gave up her body reciting one of her poems to Srinathji. Luckily, we've got access to that poem as well. Anyone interested in hearing the poem? Yes, okay. So Taj Bibi, it's a fairly long poem. But before we, in order to be qualified to recite the poem, we'll first recite one of the verses from the Nectar of Devotion, where Rupa Goswami, our hero, because of whom we have Sri Sri Radha Govindaji ji discovered again, says, "My dear friend, if you are indeed attached to your worldly ends, do not look at the smiling face of Lord Govinda, who stands at the banks of the Yamuna in Keshi Ghat, casting sidelong glances. He places his flute to his lips, which seem like newly blossomed twigs. His transcendental body, bending in three places, appears very bright in the moonlight. So if you want to be attached to your material life, do not look at Govinda Devji. Otherwise, this is what will happen to you according to Rupa Goswami. And this is what indeed happened to Taj Bibi. So Taj Bibi's song in front of Srinagi. And as soon as she completes this song, she actually leaves her body. Such a glorious way to go. It's her bhajan. There's a place in Vrindavan where Taj Bibi is, she has her own samadhi in Gokul, in a place which is now called Taj Bibi ki Chhatri. Actually, going back to the previous story, Baladev Vidyabhushan has a samadhi in the Radha Shamsundar temple, the next time you go there. But anyways, Taj Bibi's samadhi is called Taj Bibi ki Chhatri, or Taj Bibi's umbrella in Gokul. And coming to that departing poem, Taj Bibi says, the Queen of Akbar, the disciple of Vallabhacharya says, "O Sakhi, the beat of countless drums has started. Let's go and see the play of the holy festival, heralding that dark complexioned enjoyer, Sri Krishna. Our in-laws are opposing us, but what can we do? I dare to hear the beats of countless drums as I went to the Yamuna to fill my water pot during the holy festival, in hopes of meeting Krishna. But he came and broke my pot on the bank of the Yamuna. Oh, just see, Holi is taking place near to the palace of Nanda Maharaj. Let's go and play, sing and laugh together. After all, it is a big celebration. Various other instruments are being played by the cowherd boys, and Sri Krishna is playing his flute. He is decorated with a peacock feather crown, and a beautiful cloth is tightly bound around his waist. Taj says, oh, just see the Lord of Taj. The Lord of Taj is coming dancing towards me." And with these final words, she collapsed and went back to Goloka Vrindavan. Srimati Taj Bibi ki. Such great devotees. So we've got just under 6 minutes. So we'll stop here for today. We've got one final episode in this lecture series next week, where we talk about some other really special devotees of the Lord. We talk about the lineage of Jai Singh's family, some of the great kings who came from Jai Singh's family. Particularly, we'll go at length to hear the story of his great-grandson, Maharaj Pratap Singh. And it's just a sensational story. I'd say don't miss it for the world. It's actually probably the most scintillating pastime I've heard in a long, long time. But we've got just under 6 minutes. Anyone's got any questions? Yes, Prabhu?
Just wondering what caused the apparent rapid downfall, or rather moving away from the limelight of Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya in the span of about 100 years, that is between Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Man Singh, who actually revived with the help of Baladev Vidyabhushan.
The Sampradaya was still going on. The Sampradaya was still there. It was revived by Man Singh, yes, but you had Rupa Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, all those followers of the Brahma Madhava Sampradaya there. So there was no downfall as such. There was a period in India's history where Buddhism took foothold, but then Ramanuja, and then there was a lot of Mayavad worship, or this belief in just oneness, where it was believed that Krishna has no form, or God has no form. But Ramanujacharya came, and there's actually a famous pastime in the what is it, Maya Navadvip Mahatmya, which actually talks about a secret meeting between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramanujacharya, where Ramanujacharya is given the instruction of reviving the Dvaita, or reviving the the concept of duality, and kicking out and kind of driving out Buddhism as well as Mayavad away from the Indian subcontinent, which he did. And then Madhavacharya and his contemporaries came and revived this as well, and Jai Singh and all these great devotees played a part as well. So there was no real downfall as such. Those devotees were always around and still are, and we're here, a part of them. No, we actually even covered this in part 1 of the lecture series, where we spoke about not just Radha Govindadev ji, but we spoke about some of the other predominating deities at the time. Sri Radha Vallabh was hidden in a cave for 5 years and still worshipped. The deities of Sri Radha Gopinath were buried under the temple gardens for 5 years before they were taken and to Jaipur again. Same with the deities of Radha Damodar and Radha Vinod. So the devotees maintained a very low profile. In fact, last week we covered that when the deities made their way, the deities were used to elaborate worship for 79 years in a 7-story red sandstone temple, the first of its kind. And when they first moved to Radhakund, the form of worship offered to them, we had a word for it. Anyone remember? Prakritika Parivesh, which means worship performed from any ingredients that nature provides to you. They were worshipped with tulsi garlands, with prasadam offered in pots made of mud and clay. So you can say the devotional worship standards were not so opulent, but that's also to maintain a low profile, like to Prabhu's point. But we covered all this in last week and the week before. But there was no downfall as such. Anyone else got any question? Yes, ma'am. When she went to Vrindavan. When Taj Bibi went to Vrindavan. Yeah. So we covered 2 Sundays back. Akbar, at the behest of Jodhabai and Savai Mansingh, got that temple built. In fact, he gave away 1 whole year of his budget, which amounts to nearly 30 lakh rupees at the time, which is a few billions if you add inflation in today's figures, to build that temple. And Taj Bibi, yes, she saw the deities of Radha Govindadev ji in the original temple in Vrindavan. Yeah, so the temple was established in around 1585 to 1590. 1669 is when Aurangzeb came to the throne, and he wanted to destroy effectively all these temples and the deities in them, that the deities were taken out of Vrindavan, and over a period of 58 years they reached Jaipur, which is what we've been discussing in the last 2 weeks. But yeah, so next week we talk about the lineage of Raja Jai Singh. Please don't miss that. It's a fabulous class. Some really unheard pastimes. Got any more questions in the next 30 seconds? Otherwise, we'll soon hear the conch shell blowing and the Gaura Arti of Sri Radha Gopinath. All right. If we've got no more questions, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki. Sri Radha Govindadev ki. Sri Savai Raja Jai Singh ki. Sri Radha Gopinath ki.
Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Radha